Okay, so today's recording will hopefully be a little shorter than the last couple. I'm going to introduce you to using the LCD screen that's installed on each of your little micro PLCs. And I'm doing this before we move on to any more complicated instructions, as it's an easy way for us to be able to display numbers and variables, strings, text, that sort of thing. So before we move on to timers, counters, or text-based things other than the LCD, I wanted to make sure we're comfortable with how to use it. It also is nice in that it has a number of push buttons on it that we can use as I/O in addition to the 3 push buttons and 1 toggle switch that you already have on the trainer. So as a reminder, anytime you're working with a new instruction, you can use the context-sensitive help or use the general instructions manual, which I have a copy of here. And so if you start at the index of the general instructions manual, I'm just going to search for LCD, and it takes me, so it looks like the start of LCD instructions are around page 378. So I'm going to look at that. In this first instruction, LCD is the first basic building block that we have to use to have the LCD have any function at all. If you don't have this instruction in your ladder diagram and it's not enabled, the LCD will by default be in its normal configuration that we've seen, kind of showing the status of the I/O, basically what you see down here. So I'm going to go ahead and come up to our toolbar and grab the generic instruction block, pull that down here, and then up at the top I'll just start typing LCD. And it quickly finds that's the only one, and it adds it. So right now, if I have it like this in the rung with no other input in front of the enable, this instruction will just always be true. So we'll go ahead and leave it like that to start with. And you'll see there are some orange warning triangles here saying, hey, I'm expecting a variable in these boxes. And basically what each of these, line 1, line 2, line 3, you see if I float over one there, it says that those are expecting string type information. And if you remember back, we said that strings are text variables. And like time variables, they require a particular format. So in this case, if you want to just enter a fixed text here, you need to put it inside single quotes. So if I do test line 1, inside single quotes, and then for the other ones I'm just going to put 2 single quotes with nothing in between them, and that'll just leave blank those lines. Okay, so I will download that. And just a reminder, if you're looking down at the PLC, you can get some information about what's going on here while it's downloading. You can see it says it's in program mode right now, and you'll see this top left box in the very upper corner is going black and back and forth from black and out when it's downloading. Okay, I'll put it back in run mode, and you can see now that it's saying test line 1 on the first line of the display. And you can see it's enabled in front of it. There's nothing else in the program, but we've now enabled our LCD. Okay, that's a great first start. But let's say I wanted to be able to sometimes have it displaying text like this, and sometimes I wanted to have my default uninitialized screen, basically, so I can look at the I/O, see the program mode and whatnot. So let's edit our program to do that. If we go back and look at the instruction manual for it, you'll see that it lists the enable line as an input, looking for a Boolean type, and if it's true, it's going to use our defined settings, and if it's false, it'll be the I/O status. So basically, it sounds like what we want to do is turn that enable on or off. So that's pretty simple. I'm going to use an examine if closed contact, and I will use my toggle switch in this case, so that I don't have to hold the button down. And let's download that and see if it behaves as we want. Okay, so I'm back in run mode, but the display is showing my default I/O screen. So if I flip the toggle switch, I switch back to now my user-defined screen, or I can switch back and forth between the one showing me I/O and status, or my user defined one. Okay, so we're progressing in our ability to control the LCD. Let's see, next let's look at if we want to start using the push buttons as well. So if we want to use the keys embedded in the LCD display as inputs, we need to add another instruction now. So again, bring this down. And this one is called, well, actually, before I just enter it in, let's go back and look at our instruction manual in this section. You'll see the first one we used was LCD. If we scroll along down here, there's examples for LCD. There's one about the remote backlight, whether it's on or off, how that's being used. And keep coming down here, different LCD displays available. Okay, that's the real-time clock. I'm going to go back to I/O instructions. LCD, the one we want to look at is this one right here, key read. So that, if you look at the description, it says reads the key status on the optional LCD module. And here's the key thing, when the user display is active. So if we have our top switch in the mode that the default I/O screen is available, then those push buttons will not work. So you can only use the push buttons when we have a user display active. So let's go look at the command itself. So it's called key read. And looking at the parameters for it, there's only one input, that's enable. And then there's a bunch of outputs. There's an output for when the escape key is pressed for longer than 2 seconds. There's one when the escape key is just pressed initially. Same for the OK key. So basically for these two upper and lower keys, escape and OK, they distinguish between a quick key press and then a long key press. So that can be useful. You can really use each of those keys for two different functions. And then there's bits for up key, down key, left and right key. So let's go back to Connected Components Workbench and start typing key, and there's key read. Okay, so as soon as I did that, I now have this big instruction block, and I could put in individual Boolean variables. If I wanted to come up to local variables and create one that I called John up key, I can do that, and then back in the program, I could find the one that's that's for up key. I could put in here John up key. You can see there. That's fine, and then I could use that bit on the next line if I wanted to. Let's go ahead and just do that. Oops, John up key. So I can use that to control a lamp if I want to. So let's make the green light. Okay, make sure I think I've got everything I need. I'll just leave the other ones blank for now and download that. Okay, so we're back online. And I'll wait till it gets... Okay, so now we can see what's going on here. And if I push the up key, you can see the green lamp turned on. So it's working fine. You'll notice I have user display activated right now. If I turn that off with my toggle switch and then come and press the up key, you'll see that it's no longer being used as an input. Okay. So I created that up key, John up key variable, but really that was an extra step I didn't need to do. So I'm going to delete that out of there and show you what the quicker way is. If I go and look at my local variables, as soon as I added that key read instruction, the program automatically created this key read variable. And you'll see there's this positive sign, plus sign next to it. If I expand that, it has built into it already Boolean bits representing each of those keys. So this is the easier way to do it. You can definitely create your own variable like I did right here, but I can't really think of an application where you would want to do that that wouldn't be fine just using the predefined one there. So I'm going to delete that variable I used of John up key, and now if I go back to the program and select this instruction, I can come in do that. Local variables, look for all of them. And you see I had to clear that filter there again so it would show me all of them. And pick up key. And that would have the same function without having to create that separate variable. Okay, so I will let you play around with using all of these different keys. I would encourage you to experiment a little bit more with what the long key presses, these first two right here for the OK key and the escape key. Practice hooking those up to some lamps so that you can see what happens when you press short and then when you hold it down for a longer period. I'll let you kind of explore that. Notice that the CKYL, I think that's the long push on the escape key, doesn't have a variable box in here. So if you did want to assign it to a different variable, you would do that by just putting an energized output, and then that address right there would be the same thing as these down here. But again, you don't need to do that because that Boolean bit's already built into it. Okay, so you know, hopefully have a good sense of how to use the key reads. Again, remember that's only true, that only works when this enable is high. So functionally it's the same as if I had that toggle in there in front of this one as well. Does that make sense? Probably, hopefully. Or if I wanted to control them independently, I could put a different switch in here. Let's say if I put in the black push button there instead, now those inputs would only work when the toggle was in the state to engage the LCD and I pressed the black push button. Again, I'm not saying that's something you need to use here, but just keep in mind you can have the display on without the ability to read keys if you wanted to. So if you wanted to only have certain conditions under which people could use the operator interface keys, then you could put logic in front of this enable bit that made that possible. The last thing I want to cover in this lesson is more about displaying information on the various lines here. So think back here, I said that it needs to be a string type variable, and instead of actually having a variable in here, right now I'm just using English language inside single quotes. And that's an important thing just to note here. When you look at like my line 2, that is not a double quotation mark that I have in there. That is 2 single quotes. If I put in there the double quote, it won't accept that because that's not saying it's text. So anytime you have a string, you have a single quote to open the string and a single quote to close it. So just giving you a heads up there. So let's say I wanted to display a number there, and based on our earlier conversations about numbers that are available to us, I could put in, let's go back, look at our global variables. So this input scan counter, this variable right here, is one that's always incrementing. So if I just want to practice displaying a number, that would be a good one to use. So if I go back to my program though and try to select that variable, cycle count, it's right there, hit enter, you can see it's given me an error because if I float over it says a mismatch between the assigned expression resulting type, which was a double integer there, and what it expects is a string. So I need to take this integer and turn it into a string. That used to be a bit more of a challenge, but thankfully now we have some instructions that are exactly for that purpose. So if you look up here in the various toolbars, you see there's a bar that's conversions. And this is a really handy set of tools. So they're pretty much all in the format any, to, and then something. So this will take any type of data and turn it into a Boolean. This one into a byte. This one to date, on and on. You get the idea. Down to the one where we want, which is any to string. So I'm going to add a rung. I'll go back to grab a rung from over here. And then I'm just going to go favorites and say any, any to string. Okay, and now if we float over this and look at the information about it, or I could go to my reference manual here and search any, or I'll just search conversion because that's the type of instruction it is. And any to string is on page 294 there. So let's go next where I get some hot links. So went too far. And here is the any to string. So if you can look at this, you can also use your F1. And anytime you're doing data conversions, I encourage you to come and actually look at the help. Because as you're going from different number formats to strings, it can round or truncate or manipulate. If they're real numbers, how's it going to deal with that kind of thing. So a lot of useful information in the reference manual here about what's going to happen when you convert a data from one type to another. So we'll do the any to string, and then my input variable that I wanted was system and the cycle count. So that one right there. And then output, I'm going to now create a variable. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to list this as count or scan count. And I put str just to help me recognize, and then say I have to tell it that that's going to be a string data type. So I just created this variable called scan count str, which is a string. So if I'm back in my program, I can now select that one, scan count string. So what that does is anytime it's enabled, it's going to take the double integer that's the cycle count and turn it into a string. And so then I'm going to now put this scan count string as a variable on line 2. Okay, and just to kind of keep remembering that this enable bit, if I put something in front of that, that will, let's say I use the black push button in front of it, that will enable when that conversion happens or not. And what's important about that is, well, we'll watch and see what happens when I do that. Oops. Let's try that again. My connection path seems to have broken there. So just as we've talked about in class before, what I'm going to do is clear my connection path, then edit it and go browse and reselect that. Okay, and try again. Okay, we're back online, and as you're looking at the PLC, you'll see there is no user display activated, so I'm going to turn on the display. You'll see right now it's just showing me test line 1, the static text that I had entered in there, because I haven't pushed the black push button yet. So there's no information in the scan count string. Even though there's an input on the left side, I haven't enabled that instruction. So when I hit the black push button, I'll just hit it once, you can see it did allow the any to string conversion happened, but it only did it there while I had the push button down, so it's not continuing to increment. But if I hold my finger down on the black push button, you can see that it's always enabling that any to string conversion, and then the display is representing that. So if I let up again, the any to string stops updating and so the count stops where it is, even though internally the cycle counter is running up. I think that makes sense. So I'd like to do one last example for this lesson so you're able to use it, and that would be how can we change what displays on a line based on some logic. So right now we have a static text of test line 1, and then we have a number that's changing with the cycle count if we're holding down the black push button. But what if we wanted the text on line 3 to be some text communication if a push button's pressed and something different if it isn't pressed? So let's look at how we could do that. So I'll stop what's going on here, and we're going to need to add a little bit of logic that controls another variable. So I will come create another variable, and instead of scans, I'm going to just call this one line 3, and it's going to be a string as well. Okay, and then let's go back to where I can use that, and I guess we'll need one other instruction to do this, and that's the move instruction is probably the easiest way. So I'm going to say if the green push button, I don't think we're using the green push button for anything in the program right now. So if green push button is pressed, then I want to move text, and I'm just going to put in text here, the text green PB pressed. Oops, and I need to finish my quote there. And I want to move that into that variable that I created called line 3. And then down here, I want to have line 3 be the variable that's being displayed. Okay, so now when the green push button is pressed, this move instruction is going to move the string green push button pressed into the string line 3, and then line 3 is always displayed. So this will get my variable into line 3, but then I want to add another one that says let's get another rung down here. Let's put one in that says when the green push button is not pressed. So I'm using a examine if open and an examine if not true instruction. I can just copy this move and put it down here. Put it on the wrong side accidentally. And now I'll say green push button released. Oh, and I forgot to put that single quote on the end. Okay, so now hopefully you can see that when it's pushed, I'm going to move the value green PB pressed into line 3. When it's released, it puts released into line 3. And then line 3, that variable, is always being displayed there when that is enabled. Okay, so I'm also going to get rid of this black push button that's limiting when the any to string works, so the scan count will always be updating. So let's download that as our last download for the day. Okay, so it's downloaded and we're back online. If you look at the display, you can see the scan count is continually cycling since I removed the requirement for the black push button to be on. So if you look at that rung, it's just always true now. And if you're looking at line 3, it's saying the green push button is released. If I press the green push button, then it says green push button pressed. And you can, if you're watching the programming screen, you can see those rungs alternating back and forth between which rung of those is true. So that seems to be doing everything I wanted. So that wraps up the intro to the LCD display. You now know how to enable the LCD. Remember, if I flip my toggle switch right now, I go back to the default display, and now I can look at the status of the I/O and what mode I'm in, go back to my user-defined display, and it's continuing to show me scan count. So to do that, we've used our any to string conversion to take the double integer and turn it into a string. and then display it. And then on the bottom one, we've used some logic to determine what value is being placed in the line 3 variable so that it can then be displayed on line 3. I'll upload this video, and once you've gone through it and feel comfortable with this, go ahead and complete the assignment as described in the assignment in my MHCC. Thanks.